today, once again, it's all about the drip.
Snooky's brother.
Recently, the brake warning light on my Nissan S14 started flashing and I noticed a rapid reduction of brake fluid in the reservoir. A closer inspection brought to light that there was a brake fluid leak on the rear left brake, as visible here. I decided to take a closer look and try to fix the issue with a set of new seals. Let's dig into it. I usually start by applying rust solvent on the bolts I'm going to work on. WD-40 will work just as well in most cases. Next, it's time to take apart the brake caliper. There are 4 bolts holding it in place. 2 bolts attach the caliper to the hub assembly and another 2 bolts connect the brake pad bracket to the caliper. All 4 bolts are easily accessible with regular tools and should not be too tight to loosen them by hand. With the bolts gone, pull the brake caliper towards you. This movement will force the brake piston all the way into the caliper, giving you more space to pull the entire assembly off the brake disc. After taking the assembly off, I mark the outer brake pad with a white pen in order to make sure I will reassemble it in the right order after fixing the leak. Usually the placement of the brake pads is idiot-proof, but you never know, right? Afterwards you can simply juggle the pads out of the assembly. And there it is, our drippy problem. In order to facilitate working on the brake caliper, I recommend taking off the mounting bracket. This also greatly facilitates removing the brake pads, talking about idiot-proof. Here you can clearly see that the brake piston has been leaking brake fluid, since the leaking fluid accumulates at the lower edge of the caliper. Next, give everything a good once over with brake cleaner. Don't forget to catch the fluid with a container so Mother Nature and your landlord won't kick you in the balls. Now it's time to remove the brake piston from the caliper. Simply pump the brakes a few times until the piston is all the way out. I prefer to pump a few times and then check how far it has come. Simply repeat over and over until you can remove the piston by hand. The piston shows clear signs of leakage and debris. The brakes have been rebuilt about a year ago. It is possible that either the new seals gave up way too early or debris was on the seal and piston when they were installed. Luckily there are no indents on the surface of the piston. The brake caliper is equipped with 2 seals, as you can see here. Both are easily removed. The outer seal can simply be pulled out of its carving in the caliper. In order to remove the inner seal, I recommend using a small flathead screwdriver. Just be careful not to damage the groove the seal sits in, since this could affect the new seal's ability to prevent leaks. After the old seals have been removed, I recommend carefully cleaning the inside of the brake caliper in order to remove any particles and debris. On to the new parts. The new inner seal can be prepared for duty by dipping it into the fresh brake fluid. With careful fingers, the seal can then be pushed into its new home. I take my time and slowly massage the seal into its groove. Finally, I slide my finger over the seal a few times in order to make sure it's positioned correctly and tightly. The outer seal needs to be slid onto the brake piston. I prepare the piston for its new companion by greasing it slightly. This facilitates the installation of the new seal, since it will slide over the piston more easily. Once that's done, the piston and seal combo is ready for installation. I strongly recommend using this specialized tool for the installation of the piston. It is used to force the piston into the caliper by applying pressure and turning the piston at the same time. The tool comes with a wide range of attachments for a multitude of pistons. But why does the piston have to be turned, you ask? That is a good question. Let me explain. Here you can see the typical brake assembly. It consists of a piston with a brake caliper, 2 brake pads and the brake rotor. The wheels of the car are attached to the hub on which the brake rotor is mounted as well. When pushing the brake pedal in the cabin, brake fluid is forced through the brake lines on the car and creates a pressure behind the piston in the caliper. Due to the movement of the piston, the caliper itself is moving into the opposite direction. This pushes both brake pads against the rotor, which transforms kinetic energy of the car into friction and heat, slowing down the car in the process. In reality, the brake caliper is slightly more complex. As you can see here, the piston usually is hollow on the inside. This makes the caliper more compact. When pushing the brake pedal, the system works as described before, with brake fluid building up pressure behind the piston, creating a force against the rotor, thus slowing down the car. However, there is a second way to move the piston, by turning the lever on the rear of the caliper. The induced turning force moves the threaded rod inside the caliper, turning it without the rod being able to move. Since the piston is screwed onto the rod, this pushes the piston outwards, also creating a force against the rotor. The second way to engage the brake is used by the hand or parking brake to lock up the rear wheels. And that is the reason why we need to turn the piston, in order to screw it onto the threaded rod inside the caliper. There are other ways to integrate the handbrake into the caliper, but on my specific car, the design is like this. Okay, from theory to praxis. Insert the outer seal into its groove. This takes a bit of finesse, but eventually it works. Then carefully push the piston until it collides with the rod inside the caliper. Now grab the piston reset tool and start screwing the piston onto the rod. Keep going until the piston is all the way in the caliper. This is necessary in order to reinstall the brake pads and simplifies the brake line bleeding later on. In order to make pushing the piston into the caliper easier and have less air in your brake lines, you can open or remove the bleeding valve on the back of the caliper. This way the air behind the piston can escape more easily. Once the piston is more than halfway in, I grease up the groove in the piston again and slide the seal into place. Then keep screwing, just like before. And there you go. Now back to reassembling the brake. Reinstall the bleeding valve on the back of the caliper, then move on to the bracket as well as the brake pads. Afterwards, the brake caliper can be slid over pads and bracket, and all 4 bolts can be reinstalled. Make sure to tighten everything correctly. After all, these are your brakes, not your subwoofer. Once that's done, give the entire assembly another round of brake cleaner, just to remove any grime and grease that might have made its way onto the pads or rotor during the installation process. Time for step 347, drawing another smiley to indicate that this is a happy, healthy and sealed brake caliper now. Then move on to bleeding the brakes. Open the bleeder valve once more and attach a bottle to the outlet. You can use a pressurizer for the brake system, just like this one. Sadly, my Nissan doesn't accept the fittings I have, so I have to do it manually. Make sure to include regular checks of your brake fluid level whilst continuously pumping the brakes in order to flush air out of the brake line. This process is easier with a second person, but can be done alone. Keep pumping until there is a constant stream of fluid flushing into the bottle without air bubbles in it. Once the air is removed, make sure to top up the brake reservoir one final time. Alright, that's it. The brake is ready to go once again. Now all that's left to do is to install the tire, take the car off the jack stands, and we are done. So there you go. That's the brake taken care of. I hope it was helpful or at least entertaining to you. And maybe I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day.